15, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was doing targheeb, encouraging the people to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ ذَلُولًا فَامْشُوا فِي مَنَاكِبِهَا وَكُلُوا مِنْ رِزْقِهِ وَإِلَيْهِ النُّشُورُ. That He is the one who has made earth subjugated to you mankind, right? Therefore, walk upon the earth, on the shoulders of the earth, the valleys, the mountains, and different terrains of the earth, and eat from the provisions, sustenance that Allah has provided. وَإِلَيْهِ النُّشُورُ. To Him is the resurrection. There is targheeb, encouragement to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His qudra. Now, in verse number 16 is targheeb, admonishment, right? After targheeb, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings admonishment, targheeb. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse number 16, أَأَمِنْتُم مَّن فِي السَّمَاءِ أَن يَخْسِفَ بِكُمُ الْأَرْضَ فَإِذَا هِيَ تَمُورُ. He is the one, He said, have you become fearless of Him? أَأَمِنْتُم مَّن فِي السَّمَاءِ أَن يَخْسِفَ بِكُمُ الْأَرْضَ فَإِذَا هِيَ تَمُورُ. Have you become fearless of the one who is in the sky or above the sky? And He is the one, if He makes you sink into the earth, and the earth starts to tremble. So there's a very concise statement over here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to a punishment that if He wills for the transgressors and the rejectors, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can cause earth to swallow the people, the rebels, right? And this has happened before. This has happened before. This is not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merely mentioning, and there is no precedent of it. Who knows who got punished like that? Qārūn, not Ad. Ad is coming in verse number 17, inshallah. Good try, mashallah. In verse number 16, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to Qārūn, the punishment that Qārūn received. Now, who is Qārūn? Qārūn he was a very rich man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed him with a lot of treasures. He had so much treasures that he had to build a palace as a treasure keep, a safe house. So his entire safe house was a palace. It was that big. And it is said that the keys of the doors of that safe house, right, or the treasure palace, where all of his wealth was stored, right, the keys were not, they were so heavy, they were so big and heavy that even a couple of heavy weightlifters and able-bodied men, they would not be able to lift them up. They needed a whole crew of 6 packs men who could carry those keys. That shows the huge, like the size and the weight of those keys. And from that we can imagine the size of the doors of that palace where all of his treasures was kept. And because of all of this wealth that he possessed, all kinds of wealth that he had, gold, silver, jewelry and jewels and stones and all kinds of stuff, he had it all, right? And he loved to show off, right? You have that much wealth, then what are you going to do with it, right? So he had to show it off. And the people, and he would flaunt it in public. Now he has power, he has guards who are protecting him. The whole entourage goes with him in public, on the street, right? And there are poor people on the streets. They don't have food to eat. They don't have food to eat. And on the other end, in the society, this guy, Qārūn, walking down the street with his whole entourage, right? And he's decked out. He's decked out with all of his jewelry and wealth, right? And the people used to look at him, and some people used to advise him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in chapter number 28, and starting from verse number 77. There is a whole entire conversation that is taking place, right? So one interesting thing is, Qārūn is from the nation of Musa alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam had passed away, and he's coming after the time of Musa alayhi salam from his nation, right? From the ummah of Musa alayhi salam, yeah, right? So the people said to Qārūn, do not be so happy about your treasures, about your wealth. Don't be overjoyous about the wealth that you have, right? Surely Allah does not like those who are overjoyous, right? And seek the betterment of the ultimate abode. Seek the betterment of the hereafter, right? Think about the hereafter. So these are people of nasiha. They're giving advice to Qārūn, right? Think about the hereafter. You only live, as we say, you only live twice, right? So think about this life is temporary. You're going to die, and then you have to be presented in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So think about the akhirah that is eternal, and think about how you are going to be standing in front of Allah with the treasures that you possess right now on earth. And you neglect the share. You don't share this with other people. You don't give sadaqah. You don't give charity to the poor people. You're not taking care of other people, the weak in the society. You're hoarding the wealth. You're hoarding the wealth, right? Think about this and about your hereafter and how Allah will judge you and how you will be standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they said that do not seek to make mischief on earth. Allah is mentioning this, quoting these people who are nasihin, who are advisors. Surely Allah does not like the mischief makers. Then Qārūn responds. How does Qārūn respond? This is given to me because of the knowledge I possess. Qārūn says, this treasure, I have it because of my doing. I'm not going to mention name, but this video became really viral over the internet. And this guy was some singer. He was giving tribute. So he said that first I would like to thank myself and I for the hard work that I have done. That's the arrogance. That's the arrogance, right? That's the arrogance. He's attributing the wealth that he's possessing to his own doing. I made effort. I was smart. I had business acumen. I knew the strategies, right? I am the one who is skillful. I worked hard. I put this many hours. I built this business, or I built this empire, right? This is me. I'm the one who is responsible for all of this. I take all the credit of it. This is the Qārūn that is full of arrogance. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, did he not know that Allah had destroyed from the generations before him those who were stronger than him in power and greater than him in accumulation of wealth? So subhanAllah, Allah is comparing the wealth that he possessed. For the people, this is a lot. But Allah is mentioning there were people who were greater in power and more wealthy than him, and Allah destroyed them, and he had forgotten about those people. Right? Who's Allah referring to? Fir'aun, because he's from the generation of the descendants of the nation of Musa alayhi salam. And Fir'aun had absolute power in his kingdom, and he had all the wealth under his control. SubhanAllah. Allah destroyed Fir'aun by drowning him. But the criminals about their sins will not be asked, right? So criminals, their sins will not be asked. Why? Because they are going to be straight into the hellfire. They're criminals. They're still going to be they will end up in the hellfire as the punishment. So now one day he came with a lot of wealth and flaunting that wealth in public, in the street. So normally, the people, they want to look up to the wealthy people and they want to aspire to be like them. That's part of human nature. That's part of human nature, right? The lower class or the class at the bottom wants to look at the class that is above them. That class wants to look at the class that is above them, and it just goes on, right? 90% will look up to the 10%. From the 10%, 8% would want to look at the 2%. From among the 2%, 1% want to look at the other 1% on the top. You know what I mean? So that's the hierarchy. That's the human nature. We are not happy with what Allah has granted to us. We just want to go up. And we spend the entire life chasing this dunya, right? So people are standing on the streets and they're watching the entourage of Qārūn going, and he's flaunting his wealth, right? So some people, they said, would that be had the like of what Qārūn has been given? He's a man of great fortune indeed. What if we had a little bit of that? What if we had a little bit of share of what Qārūn has? He has a lot. What if we got a little bit of that? How our lives would change, right? How our lives would change. But they were those who possessed ilm. In the company of these common people, there were people who possessed ilm. In verse number 80 of chapter 28, Allah mentions, وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ, and those people said who were given the knowledge. They possessed knowledge. Allah had granted them knowledge. They said, وَيْلَكُمْ, woe to you, the reward of Allah is better for you. The reward of Allah is better for those who believe and do righteousness, and none are granted it except the patient ones, those who are patient. This reward of righteousness and belief is only granted to those who are patient. So don't be impressed by the materialism and flaunting of wealth. Don't be impressed by that. Remain steadfast upon Iman. Whatever Allah has granted you, be grateful with that, right? And focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The very next day, now he's causing fitna in the society, right? People are becoming ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are trying to aspire to be like him, which will end up in the people acting upon it in haram ways, impermissible ways, right? Because now they want to be wealthy like Qārūn. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this was enough. He was creating fitna in the society. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to basically punish Qārūn for his transgression. In verse number 81 of chapter 28, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we caused the earth to swallow him and his home. This home is the treasure, headquarter, his bank, right? His vault, the entire building in which he was living, and he had treasures stored in it. The earth swallowed it, the entirety of his house with all his wealth, including him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and there was for him no company to aid him. He had no company to aid him other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At that point, the only being that could help and come to assist to Qārūn was who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one who is giving this punishment. Nor was he of those who could defend themselves. He had no help, nor he could help himself. There was nothing, he was helpless. There was nothing he could do about it, and he saw himself with all of his treasures going down into the earth. Earth swallowed it. Earth swallowed it all. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to this incident of Qārūn and the punishment that he went through and experienced in this verse number 16, right? And this is tarheeb, admonishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the people. That in verse number 15, Allah is encouraging that after all of these manifestations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qudra, logical reasoning is that you recognize your creator. But if targheeb does not work, if encouragement does not work, you still are adamant at rejecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you have this option of looking at previous nations who got destroyed, who got annihilated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of their rebelliousness and transgression. Then take the admonishment then. Either way, come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Either take the encouragement path or take the admonishment path. Either way, come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? In verse number 16, this is the adhab and punishment that Allah is referring to. Then in verse number 17, Allah is referring to another adhab that was sent upon the people of Aad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمْ أَمِنْتُمْ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاءِ أَنْ يُرْسِلَ عَلَيْكُمْ حَاصِبًا فَسَتَعْلَمُونَ كَيْفَ نَذِيرٌ. Or have you become fearless of him who is in the sky, or meaning who is above the sky, who is the creator of the sky, if he releases a violent wind with stones, like a wind of stones against you? So you will soon come to know how was my warning, right? وَلَقَدْ فَسَتَعْلَمُونَ كَيْفَ نَذِيرٌ. Soon you will know how was my warning, right? Now this adhab, this punishment of the stones with heavy air, this was sent upon the people of Aad, the nation of Aad. Sisters, can you quiet down, please? Sisters, can you quiet down, please? Jazakumullah khair. Sisters, if we have a class going on, Jazakumullah khair. When the Qur'an is recited, we are commanded to listen to it. And when the Qur'an is recited, we are commanded to pay attention to it. That's part of the ways the believers react to the recitation of the Qur'an. We have room in the back side, and for brothers, we have room outside now in patio. They can discuss and talk, inshallah, over there too. Jazakumullah khair. In verse number 17, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions another adhab and punishment, which is a storm, the storm that comes with stones. This is not a storm of rain, this is not just a storm of wind, This is the storm that brings stones and it destroys the nation. And this is the azab that came upon the people of Ad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter number 7, verse number 65, وَإِلَى عَادٍ أَخَاهُمْ هُودًا قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ أَفَلَا تَتَّقُونَ. To Ad, we sent their brother Hud. Prophet Hud alayhi salam was sent to the people of Ad. And he said to his people, O my people, worship Allah. You have no God, no deity other than Him. So will you not fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What did they do? They rejected Hud alayhi salam. Right? The people of Ad were the 5th generation of Nuh alayhi salam. The people of Ad were the 5th generation of Nuh alayhi salam. The 5th generation, the descendants of Nuh alayhi salam. And the Prophet Nuh alayhi salam had a son named Sam. The Sam's children, progeny, and his people settled in the land of Iram, right? And the place is Iram. The people are Ad, and the prophet that is being sent to them is Hud alayhi salam. A lot of names to remember. Hud alayhi salam was sent to the land of Iram, to the people who lived on it, and they are called Ad, right? Now, there's a whole discussion about, there's Ad al-Ula, the first Ad and the second Ad, because the Ad then split up into two. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Ad al-Ula in one of the verses, Irama dhatil mi'ad, or tall like lofty pillars in another place, right? So Mufti Shafi Osmani in Ma'arif al-Qur'an, he says that with this reference of Ad 1, there was Ad 2 as well. When Allah is mentioning Ad al-Ula, that means that there has to be some other Ad nation as well, that is the second nation, which is different from the first nation, right? So there are two nations that are Ad 1 and Ad 2. The better known proposition is that Iram is the name of the grandfather of Ad, and the Ad is among the children of Aus, who was his son. I know it's technical. And is known as Ad the One. His second son, Jathu, had a son. His name was Thamud. And that's why we have this another nation called Thamud. Thamud is also Ad, but that's Ad number 2. And to remember or to differentiate between Ad 1 and Ad 2 is now called Thamud, right? Yeah. So there was a punishment that came on the people of Ad, which is Ad 1. And there is another punishment that came upon the people of Thamud, which are Ad 2. And if the genealogy, if you look at the genealogy in the back, they go and meet together under one father, which is Sam, right? So the conclusion is that Iram was the name of the grandfather who had 2 grandsons, and from that the 2 nations erupted or came about. One is Ad Ula, which is the Ad that we are referring to, that got destroyed with the stones, a windy storm of stones. And Thamud was Ad number 2 that got destroyed in a different manner. So this is the lineage of Hud alayhi salam, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He sent their brother, Ahahum. So the Prophet Hud alayhi salam was their brothers, was from their progeny, was their relative. He was inviting his own family members, his own relatives, his own people towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, towards Tawheed. Now Ad, these people, they were of 13 families, and their habitations spread out throughout Oman to Hadramaut in Yemen, right? This Oman and the whole South Saudi Arabia region, this land was very fertile. This is where they used to live. And they had so much power that they built mansions and palaces, and they carved out mountains, the huge buildings of that time, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had opened the doors of blessings. They had a lot of fertile land. They had a lot of fruits and vegetations that was growing up, a lot of cultivation, huge buildings, a lot of wealth, a lot of cattle, right? They're living their life, right? They're living their life with a lot of wealth. But then Hud alayhi salam is sent to them to remind them that your deity is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that must be worshipped. Stop committing shirk and stop being heedless and forgetfulness in regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, their chiefs and the eminent ones, they disbelieved. Inna lanaraka fi safahatin wa inna lanadhunnuka min al-kadhibin. Indeed, we see you in foolishness. How did the people respond? They accused Hud alayhi salam, the Prophet of Allah, that you are the foolish one. They said to Hud alayhi salam, you are the foolish one. For what? For calling us towards believing in Allah and worshipping Him alone. And that's the nature. When people are intoxicated with hedonism, when the people are intoxicated with materialistic lifestyle, when you come and you tell them, hey, life is short, you're going to be standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they call you the foolish one. Right? For reminding them the reality of this life. Right? قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ Hud alayhi salam responded, O my people, لَيْسَ بِي سَفَاهَةٌ I am not the foolish one. وَلَكِنِّي رَسُولٌ مِّن رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ Now this shows the etiquette of Hud alayhi salam. He didn't say, oh, I'm not the foolish one, you are the foolish one. Right? Da'wah is not done like that. He said, I am not the foolish one, rather I am the one who has been sent by the Rabbul Alameen, the Lord of the worlds. So he's explaining his position, he's not attacking them. That's one of the things that we're supposed to be doing in Da'wah. We're not supposed to be attacking. But if you go on YouTube, everybody's attacking each other. They think that's Da'wah. Hud alayhi salam taught us that you're not supposed to retaliate with an attack of argument. You are supposed to defend your position, articulate your position really well, and clarify your position. He said, I convey to you the message of my Lord, and I am an honest well-wisher. I am the mukhlis one. I am the well-wisher one to you, and trustworthy advisor for you. And then he said, do you wonder that advice from your Lord has come to you through a man from among you, so that he may warn you? And remember when he made you successors after the people of Nuh, and gave you increased wealth and physique. So be mindful of the bounties of Allah. Allah has granted you all of this. Now turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Recognize where this bounty and blessings are coming from. But they said, they rejected it. There's a whole conversation taking place. The end of this conversation was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this punishment of wind with stones that completely annihilated the people of Hud alayhi salam, the people of Ad, right? So this is the example over here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning in verse number 17, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes, He can do this again. He has done this before, and He can do this again with this form of punishment. We'll continue from here on, inshallah, tomorrow. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.